Relax and listen to the voice. Alright everyone, well you guessed it. This installment of stories is about killers, and we all know that killers come in all shapes and sizes. And here we go. When I was young, my father took me camping in the mountains. The campsite was located at the foot of a mountain that was popular with mountain climbers. That evening, there were 3 other climbers in the campsite. 2 of them were dressed in mountaineering gear, but one was dressed very differently. He had on a black leather coat, black leather pants, black leather boots, and black leather gloves. He was also wearing black sunglasses and had his hat pulled down low on his head, as if he were trying to hide his face. He looked decidedly out of place, sticking out as he did, like a sore thumb. As night fell, we all gathered around the campfire. The adults were drinking alcohol, eating from tin cans, and making small talk with each other. Me, as a kid, well, I was busy roasting a marshmallow on a stick. At one point, the man in the black leather leaned over to me and asked a very strange question. "By the way, what do you think of that creature they call a cat?" Even though I thought it was an odd way to phrase it, I answered, "Yeah, cats are cute, I guess." The man in black seemed to be angered by my reply. "No, you don't understand," he said. "There's no living thing closer to the devil than that wretched animal that they call a cat. They may have a cute appearance, but they are ferocious, vindictive, demonic creatures. I could tell you stories that would make your blood run cold. If you're in the mood to listen, I'll tell you how I was forced to flee my village and how, ever since, I've lived in fear of cats." As my father and I listened intently, the man in black leather told us the story of his life. He said that the village where he had been born and raised was a small, isolated village at the foot of the mountain. The people who lived in the village had almost no interaction with the outside world. The villagers also had a very strange custom. They believed that cats were monsters. The belief had persisted in the village for generations. They hunted cats, and when they found them, they killed them and they threw them into a fire. That was their tradition, and because of this custom, there were no cats in the village. One day, a stray cat with 3 kittens was spotted on the outskirts of the village. The cat seemed to be exhausted or ill, so much so that when humans approached it, it did not even attempt to escape. The villagers, in accordance with their customs of the village, captured the cat and the 3 little kittens, slit their throats, and threw them into the fire. Shortly after that incident, strange things began to happen in the village. One by one, the villagers started to go missing. When their bodies were eventually found, they were in an awful state. All of the corpses were horribly mutilated. Their eyes had been gouged out, and they had claw marks crisscrossing their bodies, just as if they had been attacked by a ferocious pack of wild beasts. The people who lived in the village formed groups and armed themselves, taking turns to patrol the village and protect their loved ones. However, it did no good. They couldn't find any trace of the wild beast, and the number of victims only increased. "All of them were murdered by a cat," the man in black leather growled. "A killer cat. That's what it was. A vicious killer, an intelligent murderer, a seasoned hunter. It was able to stalk its victims, following them, lying in wait and waiting, just waiting until the time was right. And then it would come in for the kill and slip away undetected." The man in black grabbed me by the arm and pushed his face up close to mine. "Do you know how a cat kills?" he asked. "No," I gasped. "It crushes your eyes first," he said, "because cats are smart. They blind you first, gouging out your eyes and leaving you helpless. Then, when you're on your knees, flailing around, desperately begging for your life, they'll come in for the kill and rip out your throat." Eventually, the last adult in the village was found murdered. There were only 8 children left, and they decided to flee the village. I was one of those children. I fled the village with my good friends, and we thought we were free, but the cat followed us. It wanted revenge. It meant to hunt us down. It wouldn't leave us alone until it had killed everyone in the village. We tried to put as much distance between ourselves and that cursed village as possible. We took turns sleeping and keeping watch over each other. None of it did any good. The cat hunted us down one by one. One by one, I found my friends murdered, lying in a pool of blood with their eyes gouged out and their throats ripped open. And after that, I was forced to go on alone. I traveled by night and slept by day. For years and years, I managed to outwit the cat. That's how I stayed alive. I took refuge up here in the mountains, and that's where I am today, because the cat is still after me. I'm here to tell you that the cat is a monster. It never caught up with me yet, but it came mighty close. And with that, the man in black took off his sunglasses, and I let out a terrified scream. He didn't have any eyes. Where his eyes should have been, there were just hollow, empty, scratched sockets. This is the story of Mary Bell. Mary Bell was a little girl who came from a very bad home. Her mother was an alcoholic, and her father was mostly absent. She was abused and neglected for most of her life. When she was 11 years old, she strangled a little boy named Martin Brown to death and left his body on a patch of wasteland. Not long afterwards, she broke into a school with her friend Norma, and the 2 girls left anonymous notes with bizarre messages like, "I murder so that I may come back," and "We murder, watch out. There are murderers about. We murdered Martin Brown." A few months later, Mary strangled another little boy to death. Norma was probably involved as well. They carved the letter M into his stomach. Mary turned up at the boy's house and asked his mother if she could see him in his coffin, and started laughing at his funeral. The police grew suspicious and arrested the 2 girls. Mary wouldn't admit to anything, but Norma told the police what she knew. The 2 girls were tried for murder. Mary Bell was found guilty and went to prison. At the age of 23, she was released and the police gave her a new identity. Since then, she has lived a normal life and also has children of her own. This is the story of Nevada Tan. Nevada Tan is the nickname of an 11-year-old Japanese girl who murdered her classmate. Her real identity is supposed to be kept secret. She had some sort of disagreement with a girl in her class, so during lunch break, she brought the girl into an empty room and cut her throat with a knife. Afterwards, she went back to her classroom covered in bloodstains. Her classmates then flew into a panic, and her teacher called the police. Nevada was arrested, and when the police asked her why she had done such a horrible thing, Nevada Tan said that the dead girl had posted messages on her website saying that she was overweight and calling her a goody two-shoes. According to reports, Nevada Tan's website was based on the Japanese urban legend, the Red Room. Nevada Tan was sent to prison, where she was expected to be held and then released somewhere around the year 2013. This is the story of Jasmine Richardson. Jasmine Richardson was a normal 12-year-old girl from Alberta, Canada. She got involved in a goth scene, started dressing in black and wearing garish makeup. On the internet, Jasmine used the nickname Runaway Devil, and her profile said, "Welcome to my tragic end." She became an out-of-control tween, sneaking out to go to concerts without her parents' knowledge. She also had a boyfriend who was 23 years old, and he told people he was a 300-year-old werewolf. When her parents found out, they grounded her and they forbade her from seeing him. One night while her parents were asleep, she let her boyfriend into her house. He stabbed her parents to death while she murdered her 8-year-old brother. Afterwards, they tried to flee, but the police found the pair the next day and arrested them. While they were in custody, Jasmine's boyfriend, only known as Steinke, asked her to marry him via text message, and she accepted. Jasmine was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Her boyfriend was given 3 life sentences. Since then, Jasmine has been released and has expressed remorse for her crimes on many occasions. A psychiatrist named Dr. Carey is about to finish up for the day when a new patient insists on seeing her. She lets him in and realizes that he's just a teenage boy. He says his name is Sean. He's sweaty and nervous, and although he makes her feel uncomfortable, she tells him to sit down on the couch. When she asks him what the problem is, he tells her that he has been having psychic visions in which he sees people being murdered. Have you ever heard of the Grandma Killer? He asks. What do you know about the Grandma Killer, Sean? She replies. Nothing, he says, but I knew the victims, and I watched them die, one by one. Sean tells her that the first time he had one of these visions, he was in the shower. He saw a young blonde woman being chased by a killer wearing a mask that was molded to look like the face of a grandmother. She was running down a dark alley, and the killer had her cornered. "That's a good girl," the killer cackled. "Now come to grandmother." And then he took out a knife and stabbed her to death. Sean went on. The second time that he had a vision, he was in the pool with his girlfriend, Jennifer. He saw another young woman being chased by the Grandma Killer. The woman was running down a hallway, but when she came to a locked door, she was trapped, with no place left to go. The killer took out a meat cleaver and said, There, there's nothing to be afraid of. It's just grandmother." And then as the girl screamed in terror, the killer hacked the poor woman to death. "The next morning it was in the headlines," said Sean. "She was a teacher at my school. Her body had been dismembered and scattered throughout the school. If they didn't have her ID, they would have never been able to identify her. They looked everywhere, but they never found it." "What? They never found what?" asked the psychiatrist. "Her ID?" "No," Sean replies. "Her head. The killer must have taken it with him." When Sean's girlfriend Jenny found out about his visions, she broke up with him. "She wouldn't even talk to me," he said. "She avoided me in school, and she wouldn't return my calls. She thought I was some kind of sick creep. I don't know, maybe she thought I had something to do with it." All of a sudden, everyone in school knew about his visions. His friends deserted him, and he was left with no one to turn to. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, and he was afraid to close his eyes for fear of what he might see. "Can you imagine what it was like?" he asks. "Knowing that there was a lunatic out there, and knowing that he would probably kill again. I'd lay awake at night just wondering, what kind of man could even be behind that mask? What could make someone do something like that?" Sean's grades in school began to slide. His parents sent him to a number of doctors trying to figure out what was wrong with him. They put him on antidepressants, but none of that did any good. And then it happened again. He had another vision. To his horror, he saw the grandma killer stalking another victim. And this time, it was someone Sean knew very well. It was his ex-girlfriend, Jenny. Jenny was on the floor, screaming and trying to crawl away as the crazed killer took out his meat cleaver.
"Don't run and hide. It's just Granny,"
said the killer. Sean immediately snapped out of it, grabbed his phone and called the police, but they simply wouldn't believe him. "Let me guess," the officer said sarcastically. "You're one of them psychics." "Yes," Sean shouts. "That's right. You have to do something." Feeling that the police weren't taking him seriously, Sean slammed the phone down, jumped in his car, and raced to Jenny's house as fast as he could. When he got there, the burglar alarm was going off, and the front door was standing wide open. Once inside, he found Jenny's arm lying on the ground in a pool of blood. It had been hacked off at the shoulder. With tears streaming down his face, Sean made his way through the house. But when he came to the living room, he fell to his knees and began screaming uncontrollably. Sitting on the living room floor was Jenny's severed head. "She was the first person that I ever loved," said Sean. "The one person I could talk to. She was my whole world. I knew the police would never believe me. I left before they arrived. That was 2 nights ago, and I haven't been home since. Could I have done it? Maybe I blacked out. Maybe I was in some kind of weird state." While listening to this story, something strikes Dr. Carey as odd, and she finds herself feeling quite nervous. The boy looks like he's out of his mind. He could be very dangerous. For all she knows, he could be the killer. "I think I can help you, Sean," she says. "I'd like to try, but I think we need to call your parents." Sean jumps out of his seat, grabs the phone out of her hand, and slams it down in frustration. "You don't understand, Dr. Carey," he says. "I didn't come here looking for treatment. I came here to warn you. I had another vision today. The grandma killer is going to strike again. And in my vision, you're the next victim." Sean began getting a little too close, and Dr. Carey became overcome by fear. She grabbed a knife from her desk, and they began to struggle over it. She managed to wound Sean, and then she ran out into the hallway, with Sean following after her. When Dr. Carey got to the elevator, she started hammering the buttons and waiting desperately for the doors to open. She turns to peek over her shoulder, and she sees Sean staggering towards her, coming closer and closer. Sean then collapses on the floor, and suddenly the elevator doors open. And when Dr. Carey turns around, she finds herself face to face with a man in a grandmother-styled mask holding a meat cleaver. Dr. Carey lets out a piercing scream and takes a step back. The killer advances upon her and says,
"Now be a good little girl. Come to Granny."
This is the story of Graham Young. Graham Young had always been interested in chemistry. He was especially fascinated by poisons. By the time that he was 14 years old, he knew more about chemistry than many a college graduate, and he had learned it all from reading library books. What did Graham do with all this knowledge? Well, he began poisoning his own family. His father and sister became extremely sick, and his stepmother died. A teacher searched his locker, and after finding a bottle of poison and various writings about killing people, the teacher called the police. Graham was sent to a maximum security mental hospital, but even that wasn't enough to stop him. He began poisoning the staff and his fellow inmates. At the age of 23, the doctor said that he was cured, and they released him. Graham went to live with his sister and got a job. Did Graham turn his life around and become a productive part of society? Absolutely not. At some point, he began poisoning his co-workers. Eventually, he was caught and sent back to prison where he died of a heart attack. The newspapers gave him the nickname the Teacup Poisoner, and there is a great movie about him called The Young Poisoner's Handbook. This is the story of Daniel Petrie. This happened in Brazil. Daniel Petrie was 16 years old, and his friend, Gabriel Kuhn, was 12. The boys were both fans of an online role-playing game called Tibia. Gabriel wanted to progress in his game, but he was short on game money, so he asked his buddy Daniel Petrie if he could borrow $20,000 in Tibia money from his account. Daniel transferred the requested funds to Gabriel's account, but he said that he wanted it back later. And this is where the story becomes pretty messed up. Gabriel refused to pay him back, and Daniel got very upset. He went to his friend Gabriel's house and ended up strangling him to death. Daniel wanted to cover up the crime and decided to hide his body in the attic. However, Gabriel's body was too heavy to lift, so he fetched a saw and cut the boy's body in two. This proved to be very messy, and it was still too heavy to lift. He didn't have time to clean up the crime scene, so Daniel just left. Later that day, when Gabriel's mother came home, she walked into the hallway and found her son's body cut in half and lying in a pool of blood. Daniel was arrested, and he claimed that the online game had driven him crazy and made him commit the murder. He was sent to prison. These are the stories of Robert Thompson and John Venables. Robert Thompson and John Venables were 10 years old. One morning, they both ditched school and went to a shopping center. They wanted to cause trouble, so they kidnapped a little boy named James Bulger. They brought him to a deserted area where they threw bricks at him and beat him repeatedly with a metal bar. They then left the boy's body on a set of train tracks. When the little boy's body was found, it had been run over by a train and cut in half. The entire community was outraged, and the police started a nationwide search for his murderers. The boys had been captured on closed-caption television, kidnapping the little boy named Jamie, and the police eventually tracked them down and arrested them. Under questioning, the boys tried to lie, but eventually they confessed to their crime. The two boys were tried as adults and sentenced to life in prison. This happened around 1993, and as of today, one of the boys has been released, and the other is still in prison. This is the story of Joshua Phillips. Joshua Phillips seemed like a normal 14-year-old boy. One day he was playing with an 8-year-old girl named Maddie who lived on his street. For some reason, he beat her with a baseball bat, dragged her up to his bedroom, and stabbed her to death. Then he stuffed her body under his bed. The police combed the area, looking for a missing girl. Neighbors helped in the search, and Joshua even pretended to search for her. The search ended when his mother was cleaning his room one morning. She noticed something under his bed. When she pulled it out, she realized it was Maddie's dead body. His mother immediately called the police, and Josh was arrested. He was tried as an adult and sentenced to life in prison. There are no plans to ever release him. A farmer was just plain fed up. It was harvest time, and a gang of pesky teenagers were vandalizing his farm and stealing his crops. They all found it funny, but he was not laughing. He knew them all too well. Their names were Connor, Ethan, Kenny, and Ryan. One day he decided enough was enough. "These kids have no respect at all," he muttered to himself. "Something's got to be done." And that night, he was walking through his yard after finishing his chores. "I know a way to rid you of your troublesome teenagers," a voice said. The farmer looked around. On the top branch of a cherry tree, there sat a young boy. "Meet me in the woods tomorrow night," said the boy. "I guarantee you I have the perfect solution for your problem." The next night came, and the farmer drove his truck out towards the woods. He walked deeper and deeper until he saw a light. He went towards the light, and he was eventually greeted by the young boy. There was an old woman with the young boy as well. They were standing in a clearing and had a large cauldron brewing. The old woman wore a black cloak with a hood and had a long nose with warts all over it.
"I've been expecting you,"
the old woman said, opening her mouth to reveal a bunch of rotted and missing teeth. The farmer started to have an uneasy feeling when the boy slowly began to change. Instead of a boy, he was now green with glowing eyes and long, razor-sharp teeth and nails, or maybe even claws. "You are the work of Satan. I will take no offer from you, witch," the farmer said.
"Witch is such a nasty term,"
the old woman replied.
"Calm yourself, dearie. We don't want to hurt you. We just want to help. You see, we've had our share of troublesome teenagers."
"And what do you think you could possibly use to stop these boys?" the farmer asked.
"Wait and see,"
the goblin boy replied. The witch started to chant. "Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. Fire burn and cauldron bubble. Bring forth the scarecrow, give him life, and save this man from all his strife." The old woman grew silent as the cauldron began to broil and bubble furiously, and suddenly there was a loud bang. A huge cloud of smoke appeared, and when it cleared, there was a scarecrow standing there. It was dressed in rags and had a grotesque, ugly face and long, pointy hands. It was holding a razor-sharp machete, and its eyes were glowing red.
"Go home now,"
the old woman said.
"Tomorrow, this scarecrow will rid you of your troubles."
The farmer turned and went back to his truck, got in, and drove home. The next day, a teenage girl named Kirsten was traveling through the countryside with her boyfriend Joe. They were driving on back road after back road with no idea of where they were going. "We're lost. There's no way we'll get anywhere like this," Kirsten said. Ugh, you're right. I'll pull over, and I'll go to that farmhouse over there and ask for directions, he said, pointing at the farmer's house. Joe parked the car and then disappeared into the cornfield. He was a little over halfway in when he heard someone behind him. He turned around, thinking Kristen had followed him, but no one was there. However, a scarecrow that he thought that he had already passed was now standing behind him. Huh, the farmer must have moved it. Must have been his footsteps I heard, Joe thought. He began to walk back and started to call for the farmer. He noticed a machete on the ground. Now he was sure that the farmer was working the field nearby. He went into a row of corn stalks and suddenly felt a sharp pain in his back. In fact, it seemed to come straight through him. He looked down and he saw the tip of a machete protruding from his chest as blood ran down his shirt. Joe saw a brief light before falling to his knees and to the ground, and then permanently fading into blackness. Meanwhile, Kirsten was getting worried, so she went into the cornfield after him. She was in there a while and she thought that she saw him. Yes, it was definitely him. No mistaking it. She ran towards him, only to be greeted by a gruesome sight. It was Joe, all right. Or at least it was Joe's body, because whoever owned the farmhouse had not only killed Joe, but had turned his body into a scarecrow. Kirsten glanced at the second scarecrow beside him. It was dressed in rags and had a scary face, and in its hand a bloody machete. Kirsten screamed, turned, and began to run, but she couldn't remember the way out. She was halfway out when she felt a sharp pain deep in her back that seemed to go straight down. Later on that night, Connor, Ethan, Kenny, and Ryan were coming back. With them, they brought along their girlfriends, Crystal, Angela, Misty, and Brittany. Ha ha ha, Connor laughed. Look at that new scarecrow he's got. There's even two that look like humans. And look, the one with the machete, and the one over there with the scythe. They even have blood on them and their weapons. Good try, old man, but it's not going to stop us. Each of the couples went into their own little section of the cornfield to fool around. Ryan and Brittany suddenly heard footsteps behind them. Leave us alone, old man, said Ryan. The footsteps were now on the side of them. Brittany cleared away some of the corn stalks. Look, we said... A pitchfork shot out of the corn stalks and stabbed her right in the chest, killing her instantly. Ryan wrestled the pitchfork away from the old man and stabbed him in retaliation, but to his horror, Ryan watched as the old man's wound healed itself. It was the last thing that he ever saw. Kenny and Missy were next, as the ghost-faced scarecrow began to approach them. It tried to stab Missy with its glove, but Kenny stopped it. He pulled out a match from his pocket and threw it at the scarecrow, catching it on fire. He turned around to try to warn the others, but unbeknownst to him, the scarecrow quickly regenerated, stabbed him, and managed to kill Missy despite her valiant effort to escape. Ethan and Angela were killed after that when they were beheaded by the scarecrow with the scythe. Sometime after that, Connor and Crystal were looking for their friends because it was getting late. They decided to separate to find them. Connor heard footsteps in the cornstalks right beside him. Thinking it was one of his friends, he began to follow the sound. He soon felt something sharp pierce his stomach and go all the way through. His knees sunk to the ground, and he too saw a white light before permanently blacking out. Crystal was walking toward the row of scarecrows when she noticed something strange. There seemed to be more scarecrows sitting there now. She pulled out her phone to get a better look and screamed in terror. There were the bodies of her friends, all turned into scarecrows. At the end was a vacant pole. That pole was meant for her. Even worse, The 4 killer scarecrows were still on the loose. She heard rustling all around her. Quickly, she bolted straight through the cornfield towards the road. Ahead of her, she saw a tractor. Perfect, she thought. She got in and started driving it towards the direction of the road. As she neared the road, the tractor died. She jumped out and continued to walk towards the road. Strangely, it seemed like it took forever, and then the road finally came into view. Finally, there was Connor's car, and that was her ticket out of this nightmare. Fortunately for her, she had his keys. She ran to the car and she began to start it when she heard footsteps right beside her. Standing at the edge of the cornfield were the scarecrows. Quick, think fast, Crystal thought to herself. She remembered that Connor always kept a spare tank of gasoline in his car, as well as matches. She started the car and reached into the back and grabbed the gasoline, opened it up, and threw it into the air. It landed right at the scarecrow's feet. She then lit a match and threw it at the gasoline, which caught the gas on fire, in turn catching the scarecrows and the whole cornfield on fire. She drove off completely hysterical, not even knowing what she would do or what she was supposed to tell anyone. The next morning, the farmer woke up and went to his scarecrows. His field had regenerated just like the scarecrows. He looked at the row of scarecrows with a pleasant smile on his face. So no one escaped. No big deal. It's not like he'd be seeing the girl again. She surely learned her lesson. He pulled up her vacant pole and walked away with it. If anyone else was unfortunate enough to trespass, that pole would become filled up. Plus, there were more where that came from. Nevertheless, he wouldn't have to worry about those troublesome teenagers ever again. This is the story of Brenda Spencer. Brenda Spencer had always been a bit of a misfit. She was small, thin, unattractive, and had a lot of discipline problems. She lived just across the road from her school. One Monday morning, she took a gun and started shooting at the children who were standing outside of the school. She injured 8 children and killed 2 of the adults who were trying to help them. Brenda barricaded herself in her house and told police that she was going to come out shooting. Some point after Brenda was finally taken into custody, journalists asked her why she had committed this crime, and she simply replied, "I don't like Mondays." Brenda was sent to prison and will probably never be released. After this tragic event, musician Bob Geldof wrote a hit song about the incident, calling it "I Don't Like Mondays." The lyrics to the song are as follows. "And nobody's gonna go to school today. She's going to make them stay at home. And Daddy doesn't understand it. He always said she was as good as gold. And he can see no reasons, 'cause there are no reasons. What reason do you need to be shown? Tell me why. I don't like Mondays. Tell me why. I don't like Mondays. Tell me why. I don't like Mondays. I want to shoot the whole day down." And there we have it. Stories about killers. We hope that you've enjoyed this installment. If you didn't notice, it's a lot shorter than our normal hour runtime. We think that we're going to swap over to this format. I hate to say it, but honestly, we're not getting a lot of listeners, we're not getting a lot of plays, and we're not getting a lot of new subscribers. So, for now, this makes sense to us to be able to devote less time to the project until it really starts to pick up. With all of that said, if you've made it this far, we really appreciate you, and we're thankful that you shared your time with us. Take care of yourselves out there. Sweet dreams.